Good evening. I welcome you all to the third night of the international webinar, Learning in the 21st Century, co-hosted by Sethip Government College and Higher and Technical Institute, Mizoram, Hatim. Tonight, we are graced with the presence of Sir Priyanku Sarma, Associate Professor in the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences and Center for Linguistic Science and Technology. He completed his doctorate degree from University of Florida and has worked in Hankook University of Foreign Studies in Seoul, South Korea. And after which he has joined as an assistant professor in Indian Institute of Technology, Guwahati, from the year 2011 and has been working there since. Even though Sir Priyanku is not a native Mizo speaker, but he is quite familiar with the language itself, given his extensive research and his interest in the language. This reminds me of one interesting story, or let's say event that I had with him while I was working for him. I still tell this story to my grandmother as well. Once in a meeting, he asked a friend of mine who is also a Mizo speaker. He asked about the numeral system in Mizo. And my friend, of course, who is also a native speaker, without thinking clearly, she answered Sir Priyanku. And Sir Priyanku responded her saying the impossibility of such word constructions in Mizo. That's how fluent he is in the construction of Mizo. And we were taken aback by the competency he has in the language. And tonight I am very honored and pleased to host a webinar on reading in tone languages. And I believe that we will gain something or learn something new from tonight, and as well as refresh our minds once again. And questions and queries are welcomed and appreciated tonight. And for the YouTube viewers, you are welcome to drop your questions in the chat sections. And now I would like to welcome Sir Priyanku on the screen. Sir, you may take the screen now.
Amy, thanks a lot for such a generous introduction. And a lot of things that I don't remember, you remember, so that's a great thing for me. We had a wonderful time when you were here in Guwahati working with us. I hope you are able to see me and my screen as of now. If you can see my screen, please give me a thumbs up. Okay. Okay, so maybe you're not able to see my screen. Let me try sharing it again. Okay, are you able to see the screen now? Yeah. Amy, can you just confirm that you're able to see the screen now? Hello?
Yes, sir, we can see the screen.
Okay, good. Okay, so then I'll proceed on my topic today, which is reading in tone languages. And this is a recent interest that I have developed. And as, please excuse me for my voice today because I'm a little bit unwell. So as most of the Mizo speakers know that, they speak a tone language. So I think that there might be some interest for Mizo speakers too when I talk about the reading in tone languages. So what I'm going to talk about is that in this talk, first I'm going to give you a small introduction of tone languages at the beginning. In the second part, I'll talk about how different languages write in the tone languages. And in the third part, I'll talk about how tones are read, or what happens when people start reading the tones in tone languages. So this is what my presentation would be today. I'm planning to take about 30 to 40 minutes to finish my presentation. And after that, I'll be more than happy to talk to you regarding any queries or any suggestions, questions that you have in your mind. Excuse me. So the first part is about tone language. And here I'm going to talk about the definition, what a tone language is, and what are the different types of tone languages. Secondly, I'm going to talk about different areas of the world where tone languages are spoken. And then thirdly, I'm going to talk about some of the characteristics in a very large sense, in a very broad sense, what the characteristics are of tone languages. Excuse me for this. Let me erase this now. Mm. Okay, here we go. Okay. So basically, tone languages are languages that use pitch to differentiate between the meanings of different words. As you know, Mizo is a tone language. Many of you speak Mizo, so Mizo is a tone language. And there are many other languages around the world which use pitch to differentiate between words. Pitch is basically the rate of vibration of the vocal folds. So many of you may know that somewhere around here we have two pieces of muscle which basically vibrate, and that rate of vibration actually gives out different kind of pitch. So when you're singing do re mi fa sol la ti do, basically what you're doing is that you're changing the pitch of this vocal cords. And in languages like Mizo, what you do is that you use that rate of vibration of the vocal cords to differentiate between one word and the other. Such as you might have a word like lay and lay, etc. Um, while Mizo kind of languages, they mark one word meaning different from the other, there are some languages which use the same tone phenomena to mark grammatical function. For example, singulars from plurals, masculine from feminine, etc., etc. And I'll give you an example about that in a few moments. Um, Tone languages, Mandarin Chinese, which is spoken mostly in the mainland China and also in Taiwan, is one of the examples of one of the largest tone languages in the world. Cantonese, which is spoken in Hong Kong and southern part of China, is another example. Mizo is another example of a tone language, and you might be, many of you may know or may not know, Punjabi is also one of the tone languages which have acquired tones, and they have a tonal distinction, two types of tone distinctions. Um, One of the largest languages which use tones is Mandarin Chinese, and it has four different tones: a high tone, a rising tone, a falling tone, and falling rising tone. And I'm going to give you an example of the Chinese kind of tones here. For example, if you take the syllable ma, and if you pronounce as ma, it means mother. When you use it with a rising tone like ma, it means hem. When you pronounce the ma with a falling tone like ma, it means to scold. And when you're pronouncing it with a falling rising tone like ma, is a horse. So what you can see is that just like Mizo or many other Northeastern languages, fundamental frequency or pitch is being used to differentiate between the different meanings of the tones in Mandarin Chinese. So is the case in Mizo. So again, please excuse me for these writings there, and I'll just erase them. So what we can do is that we can actually capture the glottal fold vibration, the fundamental frequency or the pitch, and then we can take those numbers, which is expressed usually in hertz, as you might know, and we can actually put it display it as a graph. Then we can see the four differences between the four tones in Mandarin Chinese. For example, this is the falling tone. As you can see, the fundamental frequency is falling here. This is the rising tone. This is the high tone, and this is the fall and the rise tone. So when you're saying ma, here it's mother. When you're saying ma, it means like, hem. When you're saying ma, it is cold. And when you're saying ma, it is horse, right? So these are the four different ways fundamental frequency is implemented in Mandarin Chinese to give rise to four different tones in the language. So in case of Mizo, we have been doing some work on Mizo for some time now, and we have been very lucky that we have a very good team of Mizo speakers with us who have been helping us to do this work, Amy included there. And then here you can see that these are the four different tones of Mizo that we have got from about 50,000 different words. And what we found out that the the high tone of Mizo looks somewhat like this. It has a little curve here, but this is for another reason, which I will not talk about at this point of time. This is the falling tone of Mizo, as you can see in the red line here. This is the rising tone of Mizo, and this is the low tone of Mizo, right? So all these tone languages we can basically represent. We can take the fundamental frequency values or the pitch values, and we can show them graphically how the tones look like. Okay. By the way, if you have any questions in the meantime, you can still keep on posting the questions in the chat, and if I see them, then I can answer the questions while I'm in the talk. And after each section, actually, I'll stop a little bit and I'll give you an opportunity to talk or ask me any questions that you have. Okay. If you look into the tone areas, the areas where these kind of languages are spoken, which use pitch to differentiate between word meanings or grammatical categories, they're mostly concentrated in 2 areas of the world. One is this area, which you can see here, of basically. Oops, this is in the wrong place, but here, somewhere in the eastern or northeastern part of India, and several areas of East Asia and Southeast Asia. And then there's a large cluster of tone languages which are spoken in Africa. So the first studies on these tone languages that started with African languages, and slowly people became interested in other languages of Asia, such as major languages such as Chinese, etc. And only recently people have got interested in tones in Northeast Indian languages. So there is still a lot of things to do in case of Northeastern languages. So about 67% of the world's languages are actually tonal. So this is considering that in the world, we currently have about 7,000 different languages. Out of that, about 67% of the languages are basically tonal at this point of time. Okay, so what kind of tone languages we might have? We might have tone languages which only have level tones, such as ta, 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 ta. And all these cases, what you notice is that the fundamental frequency rate remains in a level kind of the fundamental frequency remains level, but there are different levels that they are spoken. So ta, 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 etc. On the other hand, languages like Mizo, they also have something called these dynamic or contour tones, such as you might have a tone like ta and ta, etc. So these are basically dynamic tones, which we call contour tones. And then we divide these languages usually between register tone languages and contour tone languages. So in other words, Mizo would be a contour tone language. We also have a difference between lexical tones and grammatical tones. What we are saying is that, again, this is one of my long favorite example, which is the example of the Mizo 3 types of lays, which if you add different kind of tones would give rise to different meanings. On the other hand, this is from a language called Jur Modo, and where you can see that if we use a high tone versus a low tone, basically the number of the third person pronoun changes from her to their, right? So in this case, in Mizo case, we are just simply changing the meaning of the word. Here, we are changing the number of the noun by using different tones. So that is why one type of languages are called lexical tones, and the other types of tones are called grammatical tones. Okay, so I'll go into the next part of the talk, which is which is the next part of the word, which is writing in tone languages. So I already got some questions there, so I would like to answer a little later. So if you have more questions, maybe you can start posting it, okay? Now I have to figure out how to close this. Please hold on for a second. Okay, yeah. So writing in tone languages. So that now we know that these languages that we have been talking about, they make these 4 different types of tonal differences, like high, low, falling, rising, etc. But how do they write it? So we go into the first case that we have been talking about, which is Mandarin Chinese. And Mandarin Chinese has a very unique writing system. So here I have given you the 4 examples of the ma with which have 4 different meanings, such as mother, hemp, scold, and horse. What you would notice here is that they use a script called the which is the Chinese original script, which is about 5,000-year-old script. Here you'll see that for each of these meanings they use a different character, right? For example, for mother, they use this character. For horse, they use this character. For skull, they use this character. For hemp, they use this character. Right. So there is no problem in terms of ambiguity in writing a tone language like Chinese, because people know that when they look into the writing system, they know that the letter for or the character for mother is very different from the character for hemp. So immediately they know how to pronounce the tones. Okay. So on the other hand, there are languages like Vietnamese, and Vietnamese has actually 6 different tones, as you can see here. The ba syllable, if I pronounce it with only with the ba syllable, and then what we notice is that in each case, the ba syllable has a different diacritic that is attached to it. In the first case, there is no diacritic. In the second case, there is a diacritic here. Third case, there is another diacritic. Fourth case, there is another diacritic, etc., etc. So in Vietnamese writing system, in order to represent different tones such as mid-level, low-falling, mid-rising, mid-falling, mid-falling, rising, mid-rising, etc. tones, each time above the vowel, you put a particular mark. So again, in Vietnamese writing system also, to some extent, there is no ambiguity in terms of tones in the written form. On the other hand, you look into another language called Hausa, and then if you look into this language, they are actually using different kind of tones grammatical tones actually. You'll see that they write tones in the same way, right? All these 3 cases that you see here, they're written in the same way, yata, fi, right? However, if you look into the tones, actually, so this is what a linguist has actually transcribed. So this is not how the language is written. This is how the language is written. The language is written in the same way, but the tones are very different from one case to the other. In the first case, the a has high tone and then low tone, high, low, 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 etc. So all these 3 cases are completely different in terms of tones, and they all have different grammatical meanings. However, they're all written in the same way. And then Cahill, 2019's work, he mentions that at least the consensus is such that because they don't mark tones in this language, the language is very difficult to read. There is a lot of ambiguity, and people have to wait, hesitate, stop a lot in order to correctly read the sentences. So this is one problem in case of the adult reading. Now think what would happen if a child of who is speaking a tone language and whose language does not mark tones in its writing system. They probably would have a lot of problems in the school times when they're learning tones or when they're starting to write their own language. So I would like to know from Mizo speakers also, once my talk is over, how they dealt with this problem when in their childhood in school. Okay, so in some other languages such as Etung and Jur Modo, what you'll see is that they use different ways. For example, this is the high tone and this is the low tone. In case of high tone, what they're doing is that they're using one H after the A, right? In case of the Jur Modo, they're actually using, what they're doing is that in case of low tones, they're just writing one consonant. In case of high tones, what they will do is that they'll write 2 consonants or 2 nasals or 2 nasal consonants are written. So whenever I'm using this, angular bracket, you know that this is how the language is written, okay? And this is when I'm writing it with the square brackets, you know that this is how the languages are pronounced. So this is the written form always within the angular brackets, fine? So here you'll see that Etung and Jur Modo, they're basically marking tones, and the speakers of that language or writers of that language, they basically use the H to mark one particular tone, And in the other case, like in Jur Modo language, they use doubling of the consonant to mark tones. Fine. Okay, so let's summarize. So some languages explicitly mark tones, while several others don't. For example, Vietnamese, that if you have looked into Vietnamese explicitly marks tones, even though there are 6 different tones, it marks tones. Many other languages, like the Hausa case that you have seen, they don't mark tones at all. Chinese is a very special case because it's a logographic writing system. So each symbol that they write has a different meaning. So as soon as they see the character, right, they know what to pronounce. Right, so there is no problem like having a ba only or ba and a only, and then trying to guess what kind of tone would be implemented on that. Because Chinese readers, as soon as they see the unique character, they already know how to pronounce it. So Vietnamese Etung, Jur Modo, etc., they already mark tones in writing. However, many other languages don't mark tones in writing. Okay. Okay. So I'm just give me a second. If you have a question, please write the questions on the chat box. I'll give you a half a minute. I'll take a half a minute break because I want to also check the chat boxes that I have got. Okay. Okay, fine. So I have read, there are some interesting questions there, which I'll discuss towards the end of the talk. Okay, so the last part, okay, so the second part, what I have talked to you about is that how people write tones. And I have said that some languages explicitly mark tones, many other languages don't mark. And Chinese is not a problematic case because people already get the idea what the meaning is, what the intended meaning is from the logograph that is already written. However, there are still languages like Hausa where the tones are not explicitly marked, and they are said to be a little bit complicated for people to basically figure out the meaning from what is written there, specifically in the ambiguous sentences. So, what happens in case of reading the tone languages? One of the earliest studies was done on a language called Efik in 1977. What this person called Udo Asian, what he has done is that he did an experiment on tone marking in the Efik language. He trained some people, and then for the Efik language, he introduced some tone markings, and he did an experiment whether it is easy for people to read those markings, read the language after having tone markings or without tone markings, etc. In that experiment that he did with people, he did the experiment in 3 conditions. What he did is that he trained people to mark tones for each tone on each syllable, and the tone was marked on every syllable. Secondly, tone was another case. What was happening is that he gave people reading materials where tone was marked only on nouns and verbs. In the third case, there was no tone marked. And what he wanted to see is that when people are given tones marked on each syllable versus only on nouns and verbs, versus only when there was no tones marked at all, if there is any difference in people's understanding and people's producing what is written. So what he found is very interesting. What he found is that when people mark all syllables with tones, then it takes on average to understand that sentence, people take about 14.5 seconds. When they only mark nouns and verbs, as you can see in the second column here, it takes people to understand about 9.5 seconds to understand that sentence. If they use no marks at all, there is no tone marking at all, then it takes people about 12.2 seconds to understand the meaning. Okay. Similarly, the time to vocalize or the time to speak out the tone before they speak out, the time before they speak out is about 8.5 seconds when every syllable is marked with tones. It's about 6.5 seconds when only nouns and verbs are marked with tones. And when the no tones are marked, it is about 7.25 seconds. So in other words, this category wins, right? So in other words, when we are marking only nouns and verbs in the tonal language, at least in case of Efik, people fare the best. People understand the fastest. People also understand able to speak out or to read the whatever is given to them faster. However, when you mark every syllable with tone, it becomes a little bit overburdened. People become a little bit overburdened with information, and so they take longer. And no tone marking is no good either. And that is the case, at least in case of Efik language. That was the a study, which was a study done in 1977. Okay. Post that Efik case, there are several studies that were done, mostly in Africa, to see whether tone markings help people in understanding better or speaking better or not. So one study on Com, which is a language from Cameroon, not the Com, which is our northeastern Americom's language. So this language, when they mark tones, what people saw is that the marking the tones basically reduced the basically took more time to understand and to vocalize the language, right? Uh, Similarly, in case of Chang Tu in Bird 1998, he showed that marking tones actually inhibit reading and does not reduce any hesitation or repetitions or comprehension errors. So, in case of Gom and Chang, at least these two languages which are spoken in Cameroon, what people found out is that if you mark tones on every syllable, it is not going to be useful for reading, at least in these two cases. Another case is of Eastern Dan, which is spoken in Ivory Coast and which has 5 register tones and many monosyllables. By the way, whenever I'm talking about these works, I have also provided the references down there. So if you're interested in those references, you can take a snapshot or whatever. If you don't have a facility to do that, I'll be more than happy to provide you with these references later by email or any other mode. Okay, going back to Eastern Dan, which is spoken in Ivory Coast, they have 5 different tones and many monosyllables. Now, when you have only 5 different tones and many monosyllables, what happens is that there is a huge number of ambiguity in the language. And that is what is exactly happening in the Eastern Dan language. However, Robert et al. In 2018, they did a study on Eastern Dan, and then they found out that actually marking tones here improves the reading proficiency. The last study is about that I'm going to talk about is about Pinyin system, which is a romanization scheme used in Mandarin Chinese. So as I have told you, that Mandarin Chinese is writes everything with a Chinese character. But what they also do have is that an anglicized version of each of the pronunciation of those characters, so that it is easy for them to input them. For example, if you can, for example, right now, if you type MA on your computer screen, if your Mandarin Chinese language is enabled there, it will basically convert this into the one of the characters that are possible with this particular syllable, right? So the Pinyin system is basically a romanization system. It's a romanized version of the Mandarin Chinese. However, they do an amazing thing. They also mark the tones in the Pinyin. For example, the character for mother is actually written like this in Pinyin. And you can see that the tone is also marked as 1, 2, 3, and 4 in Pinyin for each Chinese character. Right. So, in other words, the Romanized version of Chinese, which is Pinyin, actually takes care of the tonal information. It provides you the tone information. So now they did a study on the Chinese students, and what they found out that the grade 1 students in China are more aware of tonal differences than the kindergarten children. And that is because at grade 1, they start instructing them with the Pinyin system. Pinyin system is introduced in grade 1. So this is also another evidence saying that marking tones sometimes is helps people to internalize or to see basically the tone system in a particular language. So the Chinese students have become more aware of the tone system when the tones are marked using the Pinyin system. So marking tones is in orthography. So what is happening actually? Because we have found cases that some languages do very well when tones are marked. Some languages do not do very well. Their actually reading proficiency is reduced when tones are marked. So actually the success may depend on the type of language and the type of tones. As we have discussed at the beginning of this talk, that there are different tone languages which use, sometimes they use grammatical tones, sometimes they use register tones, and there are many different aspects of tones that have to be taken into consideration before you start marking tones meaningfully in a language. In many languages, the underlying tones are not always produced as intended, right? Because you might have a particular tone which is underlyingly there for a particular syllable, but because of many other reasons, this tone might actually come up as, in spoken form, it might come out as completely different. So here is one example. For example, lei is in Mizo has to buy is pronounced with a rising tone, and don is pronounced, the future marker is pronounced with a high tone. But when you are saying will buy, then what happens is that the first lei actually changes from a rising tone to a low tone. So this is this is what is exactly happening. The underlying tone is supposed to be a rising tone, but it gets reduced to it gets changed to a low tone in reality. So as a result of that, there is a problem that if you mark tone as, let's say, rising with this one, in reality, it actually is not rising. It is actually a low tone when you pronounce it. So these are some of the problems. These are some of the challenges that need to be addressed in tone languages if you start marking tones. Also, it is important to know how tones are distributed in the language. Are there, how many syllables are there? If one tone, one kind of, let's say, high tone is more prevalent than the low tone, or the rising tone is more prevalent than the falling tone. All this information have to be there. In other words, we need very serious in-depth study into the languages before we actually devise on marking tones into the orthography. So Bird 99 in 99 has said that we need to follow certain steps in devising marking tones in orthography in tone languages. For example, the first one is to identify the function and depth of tones. So what are the tones used for? Are they used for all syllables? Are they used for only some syllables? Because there are cases in languages that some languages allow tones only in certain contexts, only in nouns, let's say, to differentiate between nouns. Also, would they, how, what is the depth of the tone? Is the underlying tone very different from the phonetic tone, etc.? I'm sorry, this is not going in the correct order, so I'll just go one by one here. So this one I have finished. Practice selective underrepresentation. So you decide which one you want to actually present. For example, if you only see that it's only helpful to mark certain tones, but because the other tones are not a big problem, they are not a big bother while reading, that you'll know through different kinds of experimentation, then you select to mark only certain tones. And again, do a lot of testing and analysis of errors before you implement the tone marking into the language. So this is the key, because what you have seen in the previous cases, in the African cases, that they have done extensive studies, like testing it with different people, testing with with different kind of modalities, and try to see which system works best. Only then they have implemented the tone system. So that is what is needed. It is not a kind of a kind of decision, a top-down decision that we must mark the tones, etc. You look into how you want to mark into the tones, and then decide whether tone marking is helping in your language or not helping in your language. So what is about marking tones in the Northeast Indian languages? In Northeast Indian languages, what is happening is that we know very less about the tones in the Northeast Indian languages. In other words, we need to do more studies on tones, also on other aspects of the language, of course, but also on the tones of the Northeastern language. We need to understand the systems very well. We need to have really extensive, exhaustive study on the tones of the languages. Um, we need to see how we read tones in a language such as Mizo. Because, Mizo, I understand that there are some cases, some newspapers which use tone markings, many others don't use tone markings, social media texts don't use tone marking. How are people able to find out whether something is, what the meaning of that particular word is, where they are kind of tonally ambiguous? For example, I can give you this, this particular sentence, and if this sentence is right, then you would be probably wondering whether it is the bridge or the tongue if you speak Mizo, right? Because lei can be either bridge or tongue, and among the many other options. So this let me get back to this particular sentence, Leah Mudu, and there you can see that here probably this one is a little bit ambiguous because you don't know whether it is a bridge or a tongue. How do we find out whether people are having trouble reading this or not? So one of the ways of doing that is with a study called eye tracker. As you can see here, what we can do is that just like I have provided you this sentence on the computer screen, I can provide you on a computer screen and then attach this particular device that you see in this area, which basically keeps on tracking your eyes, where your eyes are. Right, and what it does is that it tries to see whether you have concentrated with your eyes on lei or mu or do, etc. What are you doing in reading reading the tones? So if you're doing a lot of it's a back and forth, going here, coming back again, etc., then we know that you're really confused about finding out the real meaning of lei. Right, and that is what we are currently trying to do. What we are doing currently is that one of my PhD students, who I'll mention in a little while, we ask Mizo speakers to read different sentences, and we track their eye movements. So this is a real, one of the Mizo speakers actually reading it, and we are recording their eye movements, and they are reading this particular sentence that I have mentioned here. Let me see if I can play this. Okay, here, I'll play this and you'll see that where that person's eyes are moving while reading this particular sentence. So in this case, what you're able to see is that this person is really confused, and this person is basically trying to get it from the previous or the following parts. There, it's a she, and she is trying to find out what this the meaning of this particular day is. On the other hand, we can have a sentence like this, where it is very likely that the doctor will look into your tongue rather than your bridge, or well, there may be a doctor who likes bridges, but then this is not the case probably that people are going to think about in this case. And here you can see this person looked into the doctor and looked into the lei immediately, and then found out the meaning of what is the intended meaning of lei is. So this is what we are doing currently, that we are trying to see in cases where there is no tone mark, how people are actually reading, how people are actually trying to retrieve their meanings. And just because they don't have the tonal information, is it inhibiting their reading proficiency, etc. uh, so this eye tracking experiment is ongoing, and then this is one of my students, Bidisha Buragoha. I don't have a picture of her right now to put in here, but she is a PhD student, and she is very enthusiastically working on this problem of Mizo in our lab at this point of time. So please, if you can, we'll be very happy to have you here in our lab as a subject, or as a intern in summers when things get better, and work with Vidisha for Mizo. Okay, so what did we, I'm almost coming to a conclusion, end of my talk. So what do we know about it? Okay, so knowing how readers read is basically important because, there are lots of things about proficiency, reading proficiency, children's reading difficulties, etc. They're associated with our knowing how readers read. And excuse me, every language has its own features in its written form. So as you know, some languages use tone marking, some languages don't, some languages have tones, some languages don't have tones. All these affect the reading proficiency or the reading of a particular language's readers. So tonal ambiguity is one of such features that some of the languages have. And in Northeast India, we have hundreds of tone languages actually. Like if you count it, actually, it'll be more than hundreds. And then we also need to think about it very seriously because it might have very serious implications on how our children learn in this area. So reading in tone languages of Northeast India should be studied. So many of you who are attending today maybe will be interested in finding out how people read, how adults read, how children read in the tone languages of Northeast India. Also, orthographic conventions may also be re-looked into. Maybe some languages need to mark tones. Maybe some others don't need to be marked tones, but that will be only possible when we have enough evidence or enough data from those languages, enough information about how they process tones in those languages. They will have to be done with more empirical studies. We need more data. We need more experimentation. So basically, to end the talk, as the talk is about learning in the 21st century, I believe that learning in the 21st century is possible with only empirical studies and with experimental basis. So I hope that you all will contribute towards this particular goal. I would close my talk and I would take questions if there are any.
Thank you so much, sir, for the informative talk. And we have several questions that we would like to discuss. The first question is, I come from a place where there is no script of the language we use. It's easy for us to communicate orally, but when it comes to writing, it becomes difficult. What is your suggestion for developing a script?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, and it's a very pertinent question because see each language, whether we like it. Well, first of all, there are only 2,000 languages in the world out of the 7,000 languages we talked about, which have writing systems. But considering health concerns, public service, government services, etc., all these issues, we need to have a written script for communication, right? And that will be that can be only done with community participation. So it is a very important thing that a lot of tribes in Northeast India have already done that they have made their own societies, literary societies or language societies of their own tribes, which actually give a big input in in suggesting how to make writing systems in that language. And then of course you need help from language, you need help from technologists, and for that there are many linguists and technologists in Mizoram or in other areas. You can always get in touch with them, but I think first of all at the community basis there has to be consensus that whether we need a writing system, whether we need the there is a need for how do I say, creation of a new writing system or not. So can we go to the next question?
Yes, sir. The next question is, can lexical tone training studies in adults tell us about the tone processing in children?
Yeah,
Should I repeat the question?
I think children are always a very tough group of um, tough group altogether. So I think it's not a good idea for to assume how children would process tones by looking into adult data. So I would like if you're interested, one should be always working with children to find that out, I think. And they also, like, because their universe is so huge, so they tell us more about what is happening than actually adults do. Adults are much more, like, narrowed down in their own working universe. Children have a much more larger universe, so it's more exciting to work with kids or children.
Okay, so I think the next question is one of the most common pet peeve of linguists. How many languages can you speak? And the next part is, do some people have better affinity for languages?
Yeah, so well, I don't speak too many languages, but again, like, if I tell the number, it sounds like boasting, so I never talk about the number. But I do believe that, like, some people have interest in learning languages, and many people don't. But I think all people have similar abilities to learn, or, like, acquire a language in their childhood and learn languages when in their adulthood. Okay,
Side note, Sir
then
Priyanku is very good in, yes, very good in reading Korean script. He can sing to Korean songs. All right, the next is from Emmanuel Laram and Kima. Mizo, you had mentioned is lexical variation of tonal language. Just wanted to ask if there are any instances of grammatical variation of tonal use in the Mizo language.
yeah, that is, like, from my good old friend Emmanuel Lalraman Kima, Manny. Thank you for that question, Manny. Then, so we don't have any evidence for that, and I cannot remember any such examples at this point of time. Maybe somebody else might be able to answer that question better than me.
All right, the next is from Marina. Sir, do you think it would be a good idea for the language with tones to mark tone? Because the lack of tone marking in written forms create problems in reading.
Yeah, that is what exactly my whole talk was about. That, like, whether actually whether it is a good idea to mark tones or not a good idea to mark tones basically depends on the particular tone language, right? How many explicitly how many tones that you use in in the phonetic form, right? Is there a huge gap between what your ideal tones are and what you actually speak? So I think, like, first of all, before making such a judgment, one has to see whether the, like, people who will be using the tone language script or the writing system, are they willing to add like, like, accept such kind of changes? Because people are always resistant to think that somebody comes from the out of the community and then say, okay, from now onwards you write all your tones in the writing system. That's not going to happen. Before that, like, the people who are thinking about it, they should be doing really in-depth analysis of the tones of the language and see if marking tones would actually help like, the reading in the language or not. And that is why, like, I have given you the references of these works, and I'll be more than happy to give you the references in email and provide you the papers also by emails if you need so. I think, like, Cahill and, like, Bird, etc. These people have done huge amount of work for the last several years, and these can be really guiding light for us to look into this problem of, like, having tones in the writing systems.
Right. Moving on to the next questions. This is quite general, I should say. As you have discussed tone marking, what kind of tonal notation would you suggest for a tone language like Mizo?
Oh yeah, I cannot suggest anything for Mizo actually, because see, I'm not a native speaker of Mizo. All of you know more about Mizo, the problems that you face in speaking Mizo or, like, reading Mizo than me, right? So it is for you guys to tell, like, whether if there is any problem reading Mizo, because we have seen, like, see, for example, like, look at the case of Hebrew or Arabic. Hebrew and Arabic, they don't mark vowels in their writing system, right? And at some point of time, they started, like, they thought that, like, it would help to add vowels in their writing system. The reading proficiency of people went really down. Right. So it depends, as I have said, it depends on the language, like, what kind of tones you have, how many kind of such kind of differences do you have. If a Mizo uses more high tone all the time, then what is the point of like marking? Because that anyway, the possibility of having a rising tone or a falling tone will be much more low. But we don't know. Nobody has done work on those things. Nobody has looked into the words in the Mizo dictionary and found out how many words are marked with actually what is the percentage of high toned words, what is the percentage of low toned words, etc., etc. So that needs some enthusiasm from the researchers community, from the native speakers, and from the people who are native speakers and researchers at the same time.
Okay, sir. That's all of the. Wait, there's one more coming. Would you suggest a numerical marking as Chow 930 suggested for Cantonese?
Okay, that's a very interesting, point. But Chow marking is actually mostly used by not by as a writing system. It is only for used to be used by people who are the researchers. And this is where the problem is, because what we do as researchers is very different from what people would be willing to accept, right? So of course not. The Chow markings are very abstract, even though there are attempts that people have actually tried to implement Chow letters from fundamental frequency values directly into Chow letters, etc. But yeah, probably not at this point of time. And also Chow letters are actually all for Mandarin Chinese and also used for Cantonese to some extent.
And one from anonymous attendee. What is your take on languages being added in the 8th schedule? Is it helpful for the upliftment of the language status? If yes, what will be the most efficient way of initiating such objective?
Yeah, this is a very political question. Of course, it helps a lot, having the language in the 8th schedule in terms of funding for doing work or doing, let's say, how do I say, developing technologies in languages. However, it has to, the community has to decide whether they want the language to be added in the 8th schedule or not. And I'm not very sure how this procedure of adding in 8th schedule works. I'm a phonetician, and I just work on sounds and tones, and those are my interests. So, yeah, unfortunately, I cannot give you a very conclusive answer.
Okay, sir. I think that will be all for our Q&A for tonight. Sir, thank you once again for sparing your valuable time for us once again, and also for the lively interaction that we have with you. And we would extend our gratitude to you once again for the last.
Thank you so much, Shami. Thank you for organizing this. Mizoram is the only state I have not visited so far, so it's nice to visit online.
All right, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.